Candyman reboot slash soft sequel. I guess we'll get the debate into that, like what it is. But the first thing that I want to preface right off the bat is this is a Nia DaCosta film.
Yes.
Everyone, and I don't know how you feel about this, Celeste, but everyone I feel like just kind of came into this movie and they were hyped because Jordan Peele's name was attached to this. And yes,
Hmm.
he serves as a co-writer, he's a producer on this, but this is a Nia DaCosta film, and that is reason to celebrate this film right out the bat, because not only is this an amazing film, but Nia just really does a great job. She takes the foundation that she laid in is it The Little Woods? Is that the previous movie before this? And just
Yes.
elevates it to just brand new standards, because we're talking about Candyman tonight.
Yes, I want to get back to your point about the whole Jordan Peele Nia DaCosta fiasco we've been having. I think the reason why we're seeing a lot of people mentioning Peele's name more than DaCosta's is not only because DaCosta is a fairly new director, but also you got to think about the reverence that Jordan Peele has now in filmmaking. I mean, he made Get Out, which is a very great psychological horror film, and then he made Us, which had a lot of people more divided, but there are still a lot of fans of his work, and they're excited for anything that he does. So as soon as you see Jordan Peele, so you'd be like, "Oh wow, Jordan Peele's behind this." Yes, I'm definitely down to watch it, and I do think that some of it is based on sexism as well. Uh, I've always said from the beginning that this is a Nia DaCosta film. I mean, her next venture now is doing Captain Marvel 2, so she deserves some respect as a filmmaker. And also, congrats to her for being the first Black female filmmaker to have the #1 movie at the box office.
Yeah, it's really like bar, just all right, words. It's very baffling to me to think that this is 2021 and we've been in the medium of films for nearly 100 years, and this is the very first Black woman film to ever hit #1 at the box office. That blows my mind.
Blows minds too. At least I thought that Ava DuVernay had maybe had that distinction, but shockingly she didn't, and it's very sad. But something to be happy about and sad about at the same time. Happy that it's happening, sad that it should have been done much earlier, but gladly now we're living in an age where there's more diversity of filmmakers and creators who are getting a chance to tell their stories.
Yeah, and I think to go back to your point about like the whole debacle of Peel versus DaCosta is we this isn't the first time we've seen this. When you still talk about Nightmare Before Christmas, everyone goes, "Oh, this is a Tim Burton film." No, this is a Tim Burton idea. Tim Burton produced. It's very much a Tim Burton aesthetic, but it was Henry DeSenick, I think, that actually had gone on to direct it. And the same thing we saw more recently with District 9. District 9 was a Peter Jackson produced film that name largely overshadowed Neil Blomkamp. Now that has since kind of been reversed,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that we just kind of get in this practice because we have talents like Peel that have proved themselves to be a very distinct voice within a genre producing something. And DaCosta, if you guys haven't seen the Little Woods, it's currently streaming on Hulu. It's a really really solid movie. Um, Tessa Thompson just delivers a really great performance. Her and Lily James just are just out of this world performances. The script is just so um awesome. And it's kind of heartbreaking, but it's a really well developed character drama. And I think that she brings a lot of that talent here as well. And then you kind of get that Jordan Peele influence mixed in. And so it creates this very unique, memorable product that pays homage to the original Bernard Rose film from 1992, but it also at the same time allows DaCosta to kind of really show off her talent as a director.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I have not seen Little Woods yet, but many of the same sentiments that you said about it, I've heard from many other people. And this film kind of proves that she has an eye for imagery. She has an eye for how to build up and sustain tension and how to make everything just look so damn good. I mean, there are many times during Candyman where I was seeing the angles she was incorporating and some of the creative decisions she used in showing how Candyman was terrorizing people or how the city of Chicago looked. Like, it looked amazing. It looked phenomenal. It looked like she has been a student of the craft as far as not just directing, but cinematography. You could tell that she's watched Alfred Hitchcock films. You can tell that she's watched some David Cronenberg. You can tell that she's watched some Stanley Kubrick. Like, she is a student of the game, and it clearly shows in this film. And, you know, there may be other complaints. There may be some complaints with this film, but one thing that even the most dissenter from this film cannot say is that they cannot say that Nia DaCosta doesn't have an eye for being a director.
There are some very striking visuals that this film is able to produce. I think one of my favorites scenes, just from a visual aesthetic, is the scene after the first murders have kind of happened, and his girlfriend. I'm actually going to pull up IMDb so I can speak the correct names, but it's art director to art director having this conversation in the middle of an art gallery, and the sign is just like, it's just a very basic black wall with like yellow neon and like mannequin figures, and it's such a haunting depiction of, just like really proves that her like vision of like a distinct eye. And even the I would say kind of like the first art exhibit before the first murders even happen, when you're kind of getting to see Anthony's uh new display, the Say My Name, which is kind of really what brings the Candyman mythos back into the public eye. And you kind of like have these like three-way mirrors, and then it opens up and you kind of get to see uh just really brutally honest like depictions of like racial violence that's just been done throughout the ages. And I just think that there are so many shots like that she sets up really well.
Yes, no doubt, no doubt. Some of the ways in which she is able to kind of, show the creepiness and the dark aspects of American history through this use of string puppet shows. It's a striking image. It's something that grabs out at you. Now, it does get a little bit too overused by the time the film is over, but when it first comes on the screen, it's almost like it's like a children's lullaby. It's wanting you to come in and listen to this story, and the story mostly centers around this man who is just going around the neighborhood and giving people candy, and then it becomes sinister, and then it becomes horror, and that's what it's like for many African Americans throughout history and living through now, is the horror every day of not knowing whether you're going to survive or be killed because of the color of your skin. It's something that would make for a great horror film if it wasn't something that was based in reality. And I think this film does a good job of showing the horrors of racism and even the horrors of gentrification through its use of the Candyman legend and just certain ways in which the city is depicted.
I love how it modernizes to the legend of Candyman, to where it, to your point, like how it handles the specific like African American, like we talked about this last year in our Black Lives Matter series, about how there are portions of history that we just quote just don't talk about. And the fact that Anthony, who, as I predicted, is the baby from the original movie.
You did.
Just want to throw that out there. And that is without watching trailers or reading anything on here. I'm so proud of myself. When that big reveal happened, I was just like, can't wait to text Coles. Um, but there's the fact that he even asks, "What is Candyman?" And the fact that Candyman is not something that is talked about, it kind of feels like the perfect allegory for how we handle a lot of African American history and African American stories. We just kind of try to uh, brush them off and just act like they don't have any value or they don't have any worth. And the fact is that, we've said it 100 times before, if we don't learn from the history that's come before us, we are doomed to repeat the history that we are making currently right now.
And it also shows us how us as America, we kind of have created our own problems, and the way that we've tried to fix our problems is that we get rid of the problems instead of diagnosing it and actually looking at the symptoms and fixing the roots of the issues. We see throughout the film that there is a constant conversation about gentrification, how the Cabrini Green projects were, they were originally built, for white families, and then eventually the white families left because there was a lot of black people moving in. And then once the black people moved in, the quality of the project started suffering because the housing authorities and the governments in the cities just stopped caring, because they saw them as heathens for crime and just like all things negative. And so the building started crumbling. You started seeing where cops would just not, if you called 911, they were not going to arrive there until like an hour later. The pizza delivery guys would stop delivering to the projects. You started having cops going around and terrorizing the people walking around the projects because they're living in the projects. So it became a war zone. And now, for many of these projects to be destroyed and forcing these people to move out of their homes, now because you want to get rid of this blight, this eyesore and everything that you created. You just want to get rid of it, tear it away like it never happened. And now you just want to build it up and make it nice again. Well, why didn't you make it nice again when these problems first started sufficing? I mean, we see in suburban neighborhoods, if you go to a suburban neighborhood, there's nobody out there that's willing to go in there and graffiti and tear down suburban neighborhood because you got neighborhood watches. You got the cops who are more cognizant and pay attention in those kind of neighborhoods to what shady dealings or what criminal activities or what damage may be to anybody's property or their house. But we see in these communities that are mostly made of minorities, they see this as a problem that's they're causing. The people who are living in these projects, the problems that they are causing. So you know what? They deserve to live in there. But instead of fixing the problem, they would just rather call these people criminals and monsters and super predators and then get rid of them and move them out so it doesn't look too bad or it doesn't look too discomforting to the greater city and everything, which is mostly Caucasians.
Yeah, and I think the film handles that subject matter really well. I think one of the things, and I don't know if you actually stayed through to the end of the credits, but the very last frame of this movie is actually a you know an invitation to the audience to actually visit and see statistics and learn the history of social impact that you can do. And I really applauded that. The fact that, this is a movie that is very specifically trying to bring the conversation of racial injustice to the modern conversation while also using something like Candyman, which to me, and we talked about this last year when we did the original movie, is that this is a film, and I'm coming strictly more from like a horror perspective. I'm out of both of us, I am the more horror guy. But I feel like when you're talking about 90s horror, Candyman, and even the slasher boom of the 80s, it Candyman feels like a movie that is largely left out of the conversation, and that's because I feel like what this film does is it challenges you to look at your own reality of, like, how we do things, how we build up communities and tear them down based upon race and gentrification and just multiple other ones and multiple other things, redlining and so on and so forth. And I feel like this film kind of brings that into a modern day perception really well. And the fact that you kind of get to see the juxtaposition as Anthony is researching the um the Candyman story, and he just happens to run into William Burke, who is the owner of the Cabrini Green laundromat. Like he's kind of the intro point. You kind of get to see how like Anthony lives in this like really nice part of Chicago, and then on the flip side, not that far, you have the William or the Cabrini Green projects and kind of like how they are now.
Yeah, it feels like William is pretty much the guy who represents everybody in Cabrini Green. I mean, I guess he's the guy who is essentially Cabrini Green, because most of the time when he's talking to Anthony, and he's pretty much explaining everything that's going wrong in the community about how, like, oh, you're starting to see people come in and you know, and tear down these buildings and move people out. Oh, you're starting to see how, you know, white people will take black culture and they love what we create, but they don't love us. And then it was almost like he was a mouthpiece to everything that was wrong with the black community. Now, for me, I kind of didn't like it because, you know, it was just kind of too obvious about who he was as a character. But he is essentially the voice that is getting tired of just waiting for something to happen. He's tired of seeing people being traumatized. He's tired of seeing people beaten up, killed, or otherwise just being profiled in front of his eyes. And he pretty much sees Candyman not just as one man, but as a hive. He is pretty much, Candyman is the vessel for every victim of police brutality, of racism, of white supremacy in America, every black man. And he pretty much sees Candyman as almost like a hero. He treats him like, hey, this is the guy who's going to come in here and fix our problems, albeit the way that he fixes his problems doesn't really fix the problem itself. It's kind of almost like a wish fulfillment, like, oh, this sounds good on paper and it sounds good to me. It would quench my thirst for revenge. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really shift the world. And I think that's his shortcomings, is that he treats Candyman too much like a messiah, but doesn't see how, but doesn't use the logical and real ways that he can fix a problem, which doesn't make him as worse as the people who have let the projects go, but it makes him kind of short-sighted. I mean, am I making sense with that?
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. And I think that to your point, and I guess like we'll officially put this spoiler warning, because I feel like you can't talk about his character without spoiling kind of a lot of his ideologies and notions. But before I get into that, I did want to answer a question here in the chat. You have to watch this podcast asks, which Candyman films do I have to, or sorry, do I need to see before seeing this new one? You only need to see the original 1992 movie. And if you're like me and we're curious about what the other two movies held, which I know I went on record in saying this when we recorded Candyman 92 last year, that I was not going to watch 2 and 3. I watched 2 and 3 over the summer. My curiosity got way too ahead of me, and they are terrible. Yeah. They get progressively worse. The second one had good ideas, but the third one is just like almost like unbearable. It's like a soft reboot, but the creators were like, you know what would be great, instead of, you know, doing these like really deep themes, how about we pluck the same exact story but make it a Girls Gone Wild kind of combo thing at the beginning.
Girls Gone Wild, Jesus, like you brought me back to some dark days in my youth where those infomercials would just run across the screen without you realizing what was going on. Like, not a good era.
Well, I say it because the final girl, or lead actress as it were, was actually a Playboy playmate, and I didn't realize that until I was talking with Mark, the co-host of Abyss Gazing, and he was like, "Oh yeah, just have to, you know, it's basically a soft reboot, but you know, with a playmate in the title." And I was like, "Okay, can't be that bad." It is that bad. And they try to like weave into like different like cultures into it. It doesn't work. So avoid 2 and 3. But as of this recording, the first Candyman, if you guys don't have access to it, is streaming for free on Peacock with ads. And one last thing I will say, apparently we are not the only ones that make Girls Gone Wild references, because You Have to Watch This Pod says that they made the same mistake with Jaws the Revenge this past summer. So, but anyways, to your point about Coleman Domingo's character is that I think he first off, I just want to say, just kind of as a viewer, this guy is having one of the best years when it comes to being a villain because
Hmm.
here and Zola, like he was the best part of Zola. Um, and but I will digress. I'm not trying to get into anything controversial, but I think uh for this film he holds up the legend of Candyman really well because I think for the same time in his mind he almost kind of views it as you said like as a savior to a point to where it's like if we want to get even and to see change we have to strike violence with violence. And we look and we kind of see like over the last year like yes like there are some I don't know. Like I feel like violence for violence can yield some like results, but they're like almost kind of like speed bumps in like the longer journey of what we need to do as far as like reconciliation is concerned.
Yes, it's I've seen many people during last summer when we had the Black Lives Matter movement and George Floyd. A lot of people were talking about, "Oh, I'm not my ancestors. I'll hit you back." And it's funny and it's nice for a meme and everything, but think about it. So when you see on the news where you have fascists that are marching down the street, white supremacists, and then you have Antifa come and meet them and beat them up, yeah, it's great. There's no need for Antifa if there's no fascism. So if I want to see every time when white supremacists are coming down some street, there has to be resistance to it. You can't just let it march in front of you without doing anything about it. That's how you let it roam free, and that's how you let it infect people's minds, and that's how you make them get more supporters. But the thing is, on the same token, you can't fix racism by beating up the oppressor. You can't fix racism by beating up a white supremacist. That doesn't fix racism. It's almost like, okay, you got your short-lived victory right here, but what about the people who are not violent? What about those people who have these same thoughts, but they're behind closed doors? The people that lie to your face and almost make it seem like they want to be your friend, but they have the thoughts of like limiting thoughts about you, and they believe in you in stereotypes, or they believe in you and want to hang around with you because of fascination about culture or about the way you look, which is also a problem. So there is a sense that you have to try to make people unlearn what racism is. You have to make them unlearn what it is to have biases and to have subconscious, feelings about another race based on color, skin, things that don't really matter because we all are the same. We all are one human race.
Mm.
And it's more about fixing the mentality, fixing the broken teachings that have been passed down from generation to generation. That is what's going to yield the results. Yeah, it might be nice to punch a Nazi, but first you got to defeat what the Nazi believes, and then he won't be a Nazi. Because if you hit a Nazi, then that's going to make them feel more emboldened. They're going to be like, oh yeah, and they're going to want to fight back because it's what humans' natural defense is if someone hits them, not to fight back. So yes, I agree with you. I think violence may feel good satisfaction in the short term, but in the long term, you're going to need better solutions.
Yeah, violence is almost kind of like if I can give like a metaphor, it's kind of almost like eating like a donut as compared to like eggs for breakfast. That donut is going to fill you up momentarily, but it's not going to fill you and to satisfy and sustain you the way that the eggs will in the longevity of the day. And in the story of racism, that's kind of what it feels like, is that it's going to feel good for that moment, but it's not going to yield the results long term that you're going to want to see. And I think a great example of that is Daryl Davis. And if you guys don't know who Daryl Davis is, Daryl Davis did a great interview with Joe Rogan a few years ago. He basically is an African American gentleman that went ahead and has like befriended and multiple from multiple different sectors, KKK members specifically, and he has actually gotten so close with certain leaders within certain chapters all over the United States that he's actually had them walk away from actually being it. And he's like shown, there's like video of him online that you can actually see. He's got an entire office where he just has robes that people have given him that have just been like, you know what, you've made me change my mind. And I think a large portion of that is, like you were saying, like you have to deconstruct racism, you have to deconstruct prejudice, and to really understand that, you have to learn what has come before you, what has failed in the past, and honestly, just, this sounds really cliche to say, but really love people and make yourself completely different than who has gone before you. And one of the reasons that, and I'm going to be vulnerable for a second, is I was terrified to step into when we did Watchmen last year and our Black Lives Matter, is because I am a white guy, and like you were just saying, like I think that sometimes you have people that, you know, just kind of lump white people together as being like, oh, you're all racist, you know, the same way that, you know, that all men are pigs statement is said, you know, and you really have to work twice as hard to prove that. I felt like I had to work twice as hard to, and really watch what I was saying, to prove that, you know, I'm not racist, to prove that I don't have any prejudice. I might have, you know, and I shared it last year in Black Lives Matter, is that I had learned a lot of that growing up in some of the environments I did, and as an adult having to unlearn those, not just for the not just for, you know, certain minority groups, but also for the LGBT group community as well. And you know, now I'm a proud ally of the LGBT community, and I'm wanting to create content that is specifically wanting to deconstruct that conversation of racism, because it's important. It's important to go back to the history and really learn and understand that we need to do better. We need to learn from our mistakes.
Yeah, that's beautiful, brother. I mean, it takes a lot of courage and guts to admit that, because a part of the problem is that many people, when they are taught these things at a young age, it's very hard to break them out. It takes something as powerful as really going and doing your research, really going and trying to get to know people, you know, outside of just what you see on a TV screen. And I think the problem that we have is that people are just willing to believe anything. They're willing to believe and not stand for anything. And the lessons of the past, you know, if they're going to keep being passed down through generations and generations, then there's nothing that violence will do with that. Hate cannot beat hate. You know, I feel like I'm speaking for like Martin Luther King Jr., where he talked about, you know, nonviolence. And then you have a person like Malcolm X who talks about self-defense. In this world, I believe that can both work. You can turn the other cheek and not have somebody let them provoke you into becoming, you know, um, become something that you don't want to become. But there's also a time where if you can't just let somebody come and just hit you and just leave, like, no, you have to fight back, you know, to show your courage, to show that you are willing to defend yourself. You're not going to let anybody treat you anyway. And for me, I think that the bigger lesson that we can take away from a film like Candyman is that, yes, it may be great to see, you know, people who are being racist being slaughtered and getting their just desserts, but that's not what's going to yield the best results. You know, we have to learn how to talk to one another. We have to learn how to understand one another. We have to learn how to stop judging one another, you know, because it's not just from the side of racism, it's also from the other side. Like, think about how many people we see all the time out here, you know, and they're behaving in a certain way, and yet we're willing to judge them, but we're not willing to learn like why they act that way. You know, not anybody is born racist. It's something that you have to be learned, something you have to be taught. The same thing can be said for something that, for like conspiracy theories, people, misinformation. Like we have to treat these people and try to help them any way we can. Because if we don't, then they're still going to be the same person. They're not ever going to learn any different way. And part of that comes with compassion from both sides. It has to be coming from both sides. It has to be people willing to put down their pride and ego and willing to have a conversation, because we're not having conversations. It looks like a film like Candyman comes out and it sparks conversation, but nothing ever really changes. So it's like, what are these movies being made for if they're not enacting a bigger change on the society? And I'm not saying that these films shouldn't be made. I'm saying as we as a society, when are we going to learn how to do things differently? Because these films have been warning us. They've been warning us for years now about the problems that are in the minority communities, about the problem about hate and self-hate, and about how this country is still dealing with a division. I mean, when are we going to learn the ideas and these lessons that these films are trying to impart on us?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that, there's always going to be some sort of struggle that we are going to constantly and consistently be up against as we are learning and kind of going back. And that's why I'm so glad that you have mediums like film and podcasts that are making these lessons eternal. And that way you can also kind of make them really have conversations, and that way it's easier to teach the generation that's coming up about racism, because let's be honest, like nobody wants to sit and no, I get, and maybe there's people out there that are like this, but I know for me, like a large portion of how I consume media and how I consume information is now through podcasts, it's through documentaries, it's through audiobooks. And I think that there's a lot of similarities to the generation that's being risen up, is that we don't necessarily want to read that information, but we don't have a problem consuming it via these media platforms. And I think that documentaries and streaming platforms like Tubi and Netflix and Hulu and HBO Max, they're doing a really great job. And to your point about nobody's born racist, it's something you learn. I love it. It brings me back to that opening scene from the first episode of Watchmen, where Regina King's character is talking to her adopted son, and he goes, "Oh, he said something racist," and he was being racist, and she says something. She's like, "He's not a racist, but he's off to a good start." And I think that environments really shape us and how we're going to be. And I think, to bring it back to Candyman, and there's that scene, there's that pivotal scene in the third act where Anthony learns that he was originally from Cabrini Green, but his mother lied and to protect. And you know she thought that it would basically protect him. And um I think the reason that I bring that up is because he is she wanted to not have that hang over him and allow a different environment to really shape him. And you kind of see the difference that, um, you know, I think it's a great juxtaposition between his environment, how he was raised not being in Cabrini Green, versus how uh, the William Burke's character, who was raised in Cabrini Green, and kind of like how they juxtapose that environments and what you tell and kind of how you raise your children really do have affected to them into the um, long run being into adulthood.
Yeah, you can see that Anthony, I mean, even though he doesn't have a job, he's able to be in a better situation than what William is. William is still in the Cabrini Green projects, being exposed to who knows what, by way of police presence or by way of just senseless violence. And you're able to see Anthony. He and his girlfriend are able to stay in one of the townhomes, which is almost like a sense of comedic irony, because this film talks about gentrification, and yet they are almost staying in a home that feels like it's a part of the process of gentrification. It's a very upscale neighborhood, and it's very spacey, and it's away from the urban sector. So they are living it pretty good. And then we still see the problems that are laying in places like Cabrini Green. And it brings me to what Candyman is. Candyman, he's an unwilling martyr. He's not a guy that wanted to like suffer the fate that he did. He was just a guy that ended up being mistaken or just being used as just being another statistic. He's just another person that the cops have to beat down, arrest, or kill. He's another black man that seems to be doing something wrong when all he did was give out a piece of candy, give pieces of candy to kids, and then all of a sudden there is a white kid who ends up getting slashed and cut by a piece of candy. And guess who they look for? They look for the black guy who goes around giving pieces of candy when he wasn't the guy. But just because of your color of your skin and where you live at, that impacts how people look at you. We can see Anthony, if you really knew who Anthony was, you see, wow, this guy, he comes from being almost kidnapped by a supernatural entity, so much trauma, but you wouldn't know it based on where he's from and what he dresses like, what he's into. He's into art. He's had opportunities. He's had more opportunities than other people of his ilk ever get. He was able to see a different world outside of where he was at. He was exposed to something different, all thanks to his mother. And while we may look at what his mother did as being kind of selfish and being like, oh, well, why would you keep this from him? It was for his own good. For a kid to have something hang like that over their head, it stunts their development, and it makes them see the world in a different kind of light. Who knows if Anthony would have been interested in what he's interested if he knew if a person like Candyman existed and had a plan for him. Who knows what his life would have been. So before he is infected with Candyman, we see Anthony in his own element, and it really is a stark difference to what Coleman Domingo's character is still living and existing in.
Yeah, it's interesting too the way that this film approaches the Candyman mythos, because it's not just one. It's not just one anymore. It's now 5, and they've made it a generational thing that I really appreciate it. And I think when you think of Candyman, you obviously Tony Todd. Like Tony Todd made that character so iconic. Be My Victim is just such an iconic thing, and obviously the images with like him like turning his head and having all the bees on his face, and like he made that character. And even when you go back and watch those like less than desirable sequels, he is still the man that they do, that just makes those movies what they are. And it's interesting that this film decides to stick away from his character of Daniel Robitaille, but also to kind of move into new territories and specifically bring in Michael Hargrove, who plays Sherman Fields, who we're introduced into the prologue of this movie. And like you were just saying, Celeste, he is basically a guy that is just a friendly guy in the neighborhood that just happens to be black and happens just to have a hook for a hand because of an accident or something. He just likes to give out candy. And I think that it's interesting that we're getting another character version, and kind of that it explores different ones. And even Anthony's saga and arc throughout the course of this is a transformation to become this generation's Candyman. And I kind of want to talk about for just a few minutes about the expansion of this mythology, and kind of how DaCosta and Peele really bring in a bold new chapter and really revitalize a dead franchise.
Well, it's all about, the reason why it's so good that we have modern retellings of stories like this. It allows filmmakers and writers to be able to come up with new ways of how to integrate this into the current society. A film like Candyman in 1992 could still work, but think about the optics of it. You're mostly following a white lead character, and you have a white director who is making the film, and his film is not really bad, especially when it comes to the multitude of white savior films I've seen in my lifetime. But just having him, just having a black writer and a black director on it, it gives you a little bit of a sense of like, okay, I know that we're going to get something that doesn't feel sugar coated. I know that we're going to get something that is from the African American perspective, which is a perspective we have not really been able to enjoy in Hollywood until recent decades. And having Candyman represent just the collective trauma of African Americans' history with white supremacy and racism and death, and just oppression, is a very powerful symbol, and it is something bold that I applauded. I mean, I talked to my girlfriend. After we both watched the film, and I was like, one thing that I loved is that Candyman is not just one man. He's not just one. He's not just one guy that we're following. Pretty much, when you see Candyman, you're seeing everybody. You're seeing all of the unwilling martyrs, all of the people who didn't want to be martyrs, the people who did not want to be remembered as just being another victim. You're seeing all of these guys in Candyman, the way he moves around and levitates, and the way he terrorizes people. It feels like a lashing out. It feels like a guy who is coming to people who believe in him, but the reason why is because he doesn't want people to believe in him as a monster. He wants people to believe in him as being a victim of society. But everybody sees him as a monster. So you know what? He has to play monster. At least that's my interpretation of who Candyman is as an entity.
Which is interesting because I've never kind of viewed it in that way. But I think that's why when you're looking at a film like Candyman, whether you're talking about 92 or 2021, is that not only should you as film as cinephiles, we have to have conversations because film at the end of the day, it's art. It's meant to be interpreted, like me and you can stand right next to one another in an art gallery and you can see one thing in a painting. I can see something else completely. But I also think that I value your perspective and kind of understanding films like this because I'm a white guy. I'm not going to be able to understand a lot of some of the nuances that Peele and DaCosta are saying in terms of the black experience or racial injustice or racism. I mean, some of it is obvious, but some of it, like you were just talking about, like I never looked at it and I never kind of saw it or viewed it in that way. Candyman to me, I think you're right though. Candyman isn't killing people because they think he's a monster. He just wants people to kind of forget about him, in an essence. And um, then again, I think it's also important not to. And I guess it's weird because I don't know. It's really weird to dissect like his like motivation because like they're completely different in both films, but in here you're really trying to kind of show that it feels like the having five Candyman versus just the one, and this one particular, it feels like it's trying, at least the way that I took it, is it's demonstrating that racism basically never dies. It's like when you look throughout history, there are certain flagships moments that happen that basically are reminding you of how civil unrest is continuing to happen. And I think that Anthony becoming Candyman, points us back to a lot of the things that we saw and a lot of conversations that we were having last summer.
Yeah, and it's also the generational trauma that's passed on from generation to
Mhm.
generation. I mean, think about it. Tony Todd's Candyman, he could have been a guy that lived like 4 or 3 decades ago. And then we see that the new Candyman that's in this film, he lived almost like 2 decades away from when Anthony was born. And now Anthony's just another guy who is going to be the new pallbearer for trauma, the new pallbearer for violence, the new pallbearer for being seen as a monster. Now, I'm not taking away from what Candyman does. I mean, him going around and just killing people and cutting them up with a hook. Yes, that's very monstrous. That's something that I think most people would not agree with. Yes, but there's also the sense of look who made him. Look who made him become this monster. It was
Yeah.
white supremacy.
Yeah, I 100% agree.
Labeling theory and stereotypes and just constant moments of just being seen as inferior. It was all of that built up into a collective hive, into one body, and it's something that Anthony will have to carry as his cross for the rest of his days, sadly.
Yeah, and I really enjoy the fact that kind of to go off that hive moment. One of the things that I really enjoyed about this movie from just a aesthetic is how he gets bitten by the bee in the beginning of the movie, and how his skin, just every so often you see it, but kind of his like final form is like basically almost like half of his skin is just like on par with a beehive. Like, it's really disturbing to see, and to me, I think that it kind of that disturbance almost feels like it represents the conversation to talk about civil unrest, to talk about racism, to talk about racial relations, and kind of like how we do find peace, how we do find reconciliation, and how we kind of say, all right, how are we going to be better than the past that we are standing against?
Okay, I think I see we're back. Okay. um oh, I'm sorry, I got cut out there for like a little bit. There are some connection hiccups going on, but yeah, well, what were you saying for your last 2 points? I'm sorry, I missed it.
No, you're good. So what I was basically saying was that like I really enjoyed the way that Anthony looks um throughout the course of the film, and kind of his like journey of becoming Candyman is like it starts very simple with this bee sting, and it eventually progresses to his final form, to which he almost actually looks like a beehive, just personified. It's very disturbing, and I used it and I said that it feels almost kind of like an allegory for the filmmakers to say that, this is disturbing, this is kind of, racism personified, but it is challenging us to have these conversations about civil unrest, racial relations, and how we grow and find peace and journey towards reconciliation.
Yes, like I said earlier, you can tell Nia DaCosta probably watched David Cronenberg's The Fly, before the whole transformation of Candyman. Yes, it was just like a festering wound that at first seemed minor, and then it just grew to become to control Anthony and become his new portal, so to say. And it's very disturbing. It's very graphic. The whole time I was wondering, like, dude, why aren't you not going to the hospital? Why are you not getting to your doctor as soon as possible? Like this is looking bad. But in a sense, it's almost like what would be the use? I think there would be no kind of medicine out there that would stop this. It feels like a curse, and once you're infected with it, I mean, there's no way to really escape this grasp. You're kind of done for. And so by the end, Anthony is not Anthony anymore. He's essentially Candyman. It's funny because before he becomes fully Candyman, we can see it's teased throughout the film that he will become Candyman by the use of mirrors. There's an excellent scene where Anthony is in an elevator, and the elevator is like all clear. You can pretty much see your own reflection, and Candyman comes back to disturb him and terrorize him. And eventually he looks in the reflection of the elevator, and all he sees is Candyman. He doesn't see himself anymore. So, and that was a freaky scene. It's almost like, hey, this is going to be your fate. There's no way you can escape it. And it's almost a destiny that seems to be fitting for many black males. There's a common statistic that many black males, 1/3 of them will be killed before the age of 25. So it's almost like something like no matter how good you are, or no matter how you do things differently, like this will somehow be your fate, as it has been for many unfortunate victims in recent years.
And like I was just saying a few minutes ago, like that's the reason why I enjoy kind of having conversations with people on film, is because you get to kind of see the way that they interpret films differently than you or similarly, and I think that the bee sting feels like a very brilliant way to kind of talk about how, these conversations or these issues can start off really small and progress to larger and larger, bigger problems. And, Anthony doesn't kind of seem like Anthony, like, as we've talked about, like, is a very well off gentleman. And he's, if I may even say so, he's a very dapper gentleman.
Yes,
Um,
yes,
and I mean, he was rocking that beanie, let's be honest.
he was.
Um, but he goes to prove that, that kind of violence can really happen to anybody. And to your point is like, it doesn't racism doesn't have a agenda, or it doesn't matter really uh where your class is, or your sex or your age. People just look at your skin and they judge you based upon that. And that's what racism and prejudice is at their core, is that they just kind of see one trait about you, and that's what they pinpoint on. And I think that that's kind of the journey that Anthony goes on. It starts off very small and it eventually progresses until it just consumes him.
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't have put it any better. I wanted to kind of shift gears and get to the ending. And I think this was my major problem with the film, was the ending, because it felt almost that we were channeling Django Unchained, and we were and we wanted to give the audience a little bit of a crowd pleaser, and it felt like it shortchanged everything that we just talked about in the first 2/3 of this film. The first 2/3 of the film was approaching these topics, yes, a little bit on the nose and kind of preachy, but there were strong themes there. They're approaching it from an analytical, mental standpoint. You see the violence, you understand the terror that Candyman is, but you're also seeing the dynamics of what the problems are, that African Americans are facing in the current age. You're seeing that, by way of the imagery, by way of what Nia DaCosta chooses to pick, by how Jordan Peele is able to approach these messages. And then you get to the end and it's like, oh, okay, you know what we're going to do, because, we've beaten you over the head with how bad racism is, and because we know how evil white supremacy is, you know what? We're going to go ahead and just kill these police officers, and yeah, you're going to have a good time with it, and yeah, it's going to satisfy you. And it didn't satisfy me, because it's another example of what we talked about earlier, fighting violence with violence. And at the end, we can see, yeah, they kill these police officers, but what does that do for the viewer? I mean, yes, in a crowd of people at a theater, yes, this is going to play very well, but it felt kind of lazy, and it felt like they were settling for just wish fulfillment revenge, which doesn't really work very well if you don't know how to incorporate it. And I feel like that the seriousness and the drama of the film that was playing beforehand, it feels like it just turns into a fantasy by the end. And I mean, I know it's setting up for a sequel, but there are better ways that they could have ended up the story. They could have ended the story with just showing that Anthony turns into Candyman, and he walks away, and pretty much that's like the end. It's like, ooh, you don't. Well, will we see Anthony for the next film? Or they could have ended it in a way where you don't see what happens to Anthony. Anthony ends up dying, but Candyman is still out there, like, roaming and everything. And this is something that the girlfriend is going to have to like fight with for the rest of her life. But no, it's essentially just like, we want to give you something that's going to make you happy. We want to make you feel like what Get Out felt like. And it doesn't work.
I feel like that's kind of the problem that Jordan Peele's found himself in, though, is like, we saw that with Us, where people are like, oh, it's going to be another Get Out. And it was so vastly different than Get Out. Like, it still dealt with like mildly similar themes, but like it wasn't Get Out. And Us is good for completely different reasons than Get Out is. And I think the same thing can be said here for Candyman, is that when you're marketing from from producer Jordan Peele. And instead of saying, from director Nia DaCosta, as we opened up and we talked about in this podcast, is that you're going to get those Candyman. And one of the things that, to your point about the way that this film handles even violence within the first two films, 2/3 of this film is that the first two acts feel largely bloodless. Like it doesn't really hinder on the horror aspect and the slasher aspect that the original trilogy focused in on. And that's something that I really respect about this, is that they committed to it. And the horror that they're talking about is, for lack of a better word, they are pointing a mirror at the audience, and they're saying, you look at yourselves and kind of like look at, the society that we are putting on. And I feel like they do that very well here. I think that she and Nia DaCosta does a really great job at hinting that. And it felt like that third act is like, people are like, oh, we're here for a horror movie. We're here specifically for a slasher movie, so we have to show some deaths. And I feel like it feels out of place, to your point. I totally agree with you. Like, as a horror fan, I enjoyed it. I'm not gonna lie. But in conjunction with the rest of the movie, it just feels largely out of place. And the very last like 5 minutes or so, where we finally get this oddly de-aged Tony Todd, man, it just it felt so out of place. Like these last like 15 minutes just feel so bizarre. Like once Domingo leaves the screen, like it's just like it's not strong enough to kind of stand on its own. It's like, oh, we're supposed to be here for a slasher movie, but we can't balance the two together.
Yes, and I'm also wondering, like, what was Domingo even doing? Like, what was his character supposed to be doing? Was he supposed to be like attracting police officers down there to be killed? Like, was he trying to get like the whole police department down there? I just never really understood like why he just turned into this unhinged guy who was just going out and spitting all over the screen and saying like, we have to bring Candyman back. And also, the cops, I mean, if you're going to make these guys just like people we want to cheer to get killed, can you make them a little bit less obvious and less generic? I mean, the lead cop is just the most douchiest cop you will ever see. I mean, he's like, yeah, we're going to want you to tell our side of the story, and if you don't, we're going to kill you. Like, I mean, it's just from the villain playbook. I mean, he just mostly is just saying a lot of evil things just to be evil. And so when he does get killed, you like, of course they're going to make him cry. Of course they're going to make him scared. I don't know, man. I like, if you're going to show that ending, then show Candyman just being a straight up slasher the whole film. Don't care about like trying to explore themes about racism, white supremacy. Throw that out the window. Just show Candyman being a straight up slasher. Then the ending would make sense. But it just felt like the film went from being like a Harvard education to being like a Facebook comment section.
Oh, I was gonna say community college, but Facebook works so much better.
Yes.
Yeah, 100%. And it feels really rushed. And like, to your point, like I understand like why Domingo kind of like understood the importance of the legend, and kind of like his turn in the final act. Like it makes sense to me as a horror viewer, and kind of like as I was interpreting, was like, okay, it makes sense. Doesn't make sense why you call it the cops though. Like that's the part that just baffles me, to where I'm like, I don't understand. Like, Candyman's been terrorizing the entire like city of Chicago up to this point before Anthony's transformation, and he's going to continue doing it after, because the legend is on social media and it's basically become viral. And I just don't understand why the cops have to be here.
I don't understand why they have to be there either. And just the way that they set them up to be cannon fodder for Candyman is just so easy to predict. I mean, of course, Candyman and his girlfriend are just sitting right there, and he's like close to dying. And then of course the cop He just rushes in and just shoots them within 1 and 2 seconds. Just like boom, boom, while they're sitting down, not showing any kind of danger. They're just sitting down. And then, of course, they do the easy fake out of where you think the girlfriend got shot, but no, Candyman just died right there. And so I don't understand why it makes this heel turn. I don't understand why there is need for a scene like this. It feels like Jordan Peele has gotten to a point where he's become a victim of his own success. And I'm not meaning that in the sense that he's lost skill. I'm still excited for his new film, Nope. Like, that looks to be very intriguing just by the poster. But ever since Us, it feels like he's been trying to defend against the reaction of what that film got. Maybe he felt that he went a little bit too over the head with Us. Maybe it was too symbolic. Maybe it was something that was very hard to understand. Maybe people were expecting another Get Out. And so it feels like he has to kind of get back into that wheelbarrow of what Get Out did. But it felt like he wanted to make this another Us. It felt like that with him and Nia DaCosta wanted to make this another Us, but he has to dumb it down now, because now expectations are, oh, this is the guy that's kind of pretentious. He's highbrow horror. He's gonna go over your head. And I don't think he ever wanted that, that label for himself, because Get Out, what made Get Out so great is that it does feel like an art house film. But you know what? It's very easy to understand when you break it down and when you rewatch it over and over again. Us didn't have that, so it felt like Jordan Peele was kind of having to hedge his bets and put in a scene like that to get the audience back on his same wavelength.
Yeah, and you look at something like the most recent Halloween, and Halloween 2018 comes in the wake of the Me Too movement. It comes in the wave of countless celebrities coming out about other celebrities like Harvey Weinstein, and that film balances mythology and those social commentary themes and the slasher themes all really well. And here, I think you could have done that a lot better. However, all you needed to do is, instead of making those bloodless scenes just clean, show them, be gruesome with it, keep that as an element. And that's one of the things that Halloween did so well, is it gave us the gore that fans had come to expect from that series, especially following something like Rob Zombie's Halloween 2. And I think you look at what has come before it in the Candyman series, where you have Day of the Dead and I Death to Flesh or something, Farewell to Flesh, 2 and 3, and they're literally straight up slashers. And one of the things that I feel like Bernard Rose and Clive Barker were able to really bring to that first one is that they made it terrifying because they're having these themes, and they kept that constant of, we're going to show you gruesome crimes, but we're going to show you the aftermath and not necessarily the act. And here they are like, we're going to show you the aftermath, but also at the same time is we're not really going to also show you the blood until the last 15 minutes. It's just going to be a bloodbath, and you're just going to have to deal with it. And it's going to culminate in this weird cameo from Tony Todd. Can we talk about that for a second, please? Because I felt like they had this obligation because of this new wave of neo slashers that are coming out, where it's we want to pay homage to these iconic films that have come before it, like Halloween. We're getting ready to enter into Scream 5. Texas Chainsaw Massacre is getting ready to come out with another new sequel. So there's this new wave to take these classic properties and completely ignore the canon and just set them as sequels to the original film. And that's what that cameo felt like to me. It just felt like forced fan service.
Man, they had Tony Todd looking like he came straight up out of a wax museum. They had Tony Todd looking like he just got pressed out of the doll factory. I mean, when we first saw it, I was like, okay, so Tony Todd, the guy who is most known as Candyman, for him to have a cameo, why would you only have him in there for 5 seconds? I mean, he's in there literally for 5 seconds. And I turned to my girlfriend, I was like, if he's only in there for this short of time, why even use him? Why even have him? if you're going to have Tony Todd in your film, make Tony Todd the main Candyman. That's what he's known for. I mean, that's his claim to fame, is being Candyman. Make him Candyman. And it feels like the filmmakers were like, hey, we gotta do something for the original viewers. It felt like Space Jam A New Legacy. Like, hey, I know this is made for kids, but we gotta have some Matrix references. We gotta have some Training Day references. We gotta have Fury Road references, all for the adults out there, for the people who saw the original. And it speaks to just selfless kind of like endorsement of what those films are. If you're going to make a sequel, it's okay to bring up reminiscences of the past of the film, but also you need to be banking in on what is new. You need to be banking in on the new factor, not on what is old. Use the original story as a jump off point, and then go on with your new vision. And having Tony Todd in there, it doesn't make sense unless you're going to put him in the hole in the film, which I did not know that Tony Todd only had a cameo. I came into this film thinking that he was going to be Candyman, and I was very shocked. I mean, I feel that the Candyman in this film still did a good job, but at the same time, it just felt really cheap. Just only have Tony Todd in there for like the shortest amount of time, just pretty much a blink and boom, he's gone. And also the de-aging, I know we cramp on Martin Scorsese's The Irishman, but trust me, man, this looks kind of worse than what The Irishman looked like.
Yeah, it's pretty rough. And when you talk about legacy, I mean, Vanessa Williams as Anne Marie McCoy makes, she has a more impactful and pivotal scene in this. And, she's kind of a secondary character in the original film. And then you also have Virginia Marsden coming back as Helen Lyle through a voice recording, but still, like, her voice gets more screen time than Tony Todd does. Like, I'm all for, like, paying legacy to what's coming before it and like doing new interpretations. And I love the fact that, we are kind of taking the Candyman mythology and saying, all right, there were 5 Candyman, and now Anthony McCoy is our 6th Candyman. I'm all for that. I love that. And because it does speak to a lot of the deeper themes that the film deals with, but you still need to have him more than just a cameo, because he's the OG. He is the original guy that started all of this. And, even when you go back to look at the first film, he doesn't make a appearance until 45 minutes into the movie. And even then, like, I mean, I would say he probably has less than 25 minutes of screen time, but it's impactful enough to where him. And when you say Candyman, people aren't going to think about, the sequels that came after it. They're not going to think about the themes of racism or folklore. They're not going to think about Cabrini Green. They're not going to think about Helen Lyle. They are going to think about Tony freaking Todd. And this film did him dirty.
Also, the film did the characters dirty as well. I mean, Anthony, for him to be a leading guy, and it's mostly due to it's mostly due to Yaya's just great talent, how he's able to pull off this character that really has no depth or any dimensions to. Like, I felt myself speaking to myself the whole time. I was like, Anthony, this guy was a baby in the first film. I mean, there is a way that you can explore this character more, and we can get to know him and fill in the blanks about how he was living life and how he grew up, to become this artist, this guy who loves to paint. I feel like I didn't get anything of that. And you kind of just wonder, like, who is Anthony? I didn't connect with him really as a character. And for him to only have one scene with his mother, I mean, they also did Vanessa Williams dirty in this film. Like, I know she gets one scene. She only gets one scene in this film. And she is the mother of the leading character. Does not make any sense. And also, Tiana Paris, I think that's her name. Tiana, her character, they only show one scene of her childhood where, like, you see that her father had killed himself in front of her eyes, and boom, and then that's, I guess, is supposed to be who she is as a character. Like, you couldn't show me more than that. I mean, how did you feel about that? Because I was kind of shocked by how underdeveloped these characters were.
obviously, I mean, as a conspiracy amateur conspiracy theorist, I feel like I've related to Anthony in that regard. But I feel like if you don't have like a enjoyment into like mythologies and like urban legends and kind of stuff like that, you're just kind of be like, oh, this is a guy that clearly needs to do something better with this time. But yeah, these characters are really one note. Like Anthony is a guy that is has this pain, but he doesn't understand the source of the pain. And I really wish that they would have brought Vanessa Williams in more than just the one scene. Like even the way that they're like, oh yeah, like I'll call him back. I'm like, there's a strain there between the two of them, and I'm just like, but but why? Like explain that, like explore that, because I think that that scene and that twist, quote unquote, of him being born in Cabrini Green comes way too late in the film. So you kind of lose that effectiveness for that character development. And also too, I just didn't understand why her character specifically had that scene. Like it just didn't make sense to me. Like it felt like very like I was like, okay, well, she's a victim of trauma. I mean, to a degree, we all have trauma that we've endured, whether you've lost a parent or a grandparent or someone close to you, or you've lost someone to suicide, or you've been depressed, or the list goes on and on. Like we all have some degree of trauma or grief or just mental anguish that has scarred us from childhood. Maybe you saw a movie way too early or whatever. But they just didn't do anything. And that could have been a real connecting point for their characters as they were slowly drifting apart from one another throughout the course of the film. And I feel like this film, kind of to your point, 100% agree that this film does the characters real dirty.
Yeah, it's like the runtime. It's like the runtime is a detriment to what the story could have been. I would have liked to seen an additional 20 minutes of this. I do like my 85 to 90 minute films, but it depends on how much you can put into those 85 to 90 minutes that really makes a difference. You know, check out a film like this is going to be an unrelated example. Check out a film like Paths of Glory by Stanley Kubrick in 1957. 88-minute film, but it packs in so much detail and so much character development, so much valuable themes and messages that it feels almost like a 2-hour film, but it goes by in a zip. And that's the magic formula for how to make a short film. And I know in the horror genre we value the kind of runtimes that this film has, but if you're going to tell a story about a character like Candyman and just the circumstances of systematic inequalities, then you need more time. You need more things to flesh out. You need more development in a lot of areas. There are so many deficiencies, not just involving characters, but just like the narrative aspect, that this is not a film that even strikes as being more poignant than the original film. The original film has something that you can look forward to on a rewatch. You can kind of study more about who Candyman is and why this woman is obsessed with finding out, and why Candyman is torturing this woman, and why he is a lonely man that wants a lover. He needs a lover in the afterlife with him. You can come back to things like that and explore them. But in this film, it feels like, hey, we're going to show you some strong themes, and then we're going to give you this ending, and then boom, that's over. It feels like a hot pocket meal. Like you eat it, but it's not nothing that's fulfilling.
Yeah, to your point about cramming in so much information, like even just pulling from recent memory, especially in the horror genre. You look at a film like PG Psycho Gorman, it is like 90 minutes or something along those lines, and it just completely just gives you a great mythology. It gives you stunning visuals, just great character development, and a really entertaining kills, while also kind of staying in its own its own playground in that terms. And another film also this year that has, it's like 90 minutes, I'm looking up right now on I mean, it really flies by, but 84 minutes is Censors, another great movie. It says a lot and it does so much with its time, whether it addresses trauma, it addresses grief, it addresses censorship, and it gives a really compelling story and just really just intensely relatable characters. Then to kind of pull it out of the horror genre, you look at a movie like Pig. Pig is a movie that packs so much heart, so much character development, and is just so simple. At the end of the day, it's able to do so much in its uh runtime that I feel like even when you look at the original Candyman is only 10 minutes longer, and it's able to balance so much more of its character development, um horror, and its themes of social injustice and civil unrest. And I feel like even if it had matched the original runtime and had been half of what you're asking for, this film could have felt more complete.
Yeah, and this is not me saying that Candyman is a complete loss, because I still think that this is a very good horror film, and that speaks a lot because we often tend to shy away from things that are just good. But what's wrong with being good? What's wrong with being very good? And I think this film will be a good like addition to the momentum of Nia DaCosta. She's on her way to making the Marvels, and I'm kind of interested to see how that turns out based on this film and based on the way that she is able to craft up imagery in her films. She has a very distinctive style, and I feel that if she's away from having to do movies on subjects like this, and she's able to kind of branch out and get experience in the finer aspects of storytelling and the finer aspects of tone and kind of pacing, then she's going to be all right. you know Once again, this film is going to play well for audience, a full audience. I mean, especially for people who miss the theater experience. This is a film you want to see in the theater, especially with a group of friends or with a date. And also, the score is chilling. I love the score of this film. Cinematography, like we said, is A+. Yaya's great. I mean, the guy's a star. So, this is not too surprising. Tayana, how do we say her name? I really do not want to mispronounce her name. Let me
Oh,
look it up.
it's Tiana Paris.
Yeah, Tiana. She was in WandaVision earlier this year. I think it was last year. I think it was last year, WandaVision, right?
No, it was earlier this year. It was January to March this year.
Okay, so yeah, this year. But she's been doing a lot of great work, but she's not been able to hit the mainstream. And I think a feature like this, which is going to have a lot of eyes on it, she'll finally be able to break through and have her moment, which is great. And I'm still on the bandwagon for Jordan Peele. I love Get Out too much, and I love Us too much to just jump off completely. But seeing what he did with the Twilight Zone, and also seeing what he did with Amazon's Hunters, and seeing what he did with this, I'm kind of wondering if he's starting to become a guy who's using the same kind of points. He's making the same points every time, and I want to see something a little bit more challenging, like what Get Out was.
Yeah, and Get Out was such a drastic change from Key and Peele and Keanu that had come before it, and I think that kind of shock element really helped it become the conversational piece that it has become. And I also will say that specifically for this movie right here, I am going to say, this is my opinion, is that this is one of the best horror films of the year. I've watched a lot of horror this year, and everything from international to direct to video to Shutter exclusive releases, and this is, I would probably say, within my top 10 of this year as far as horror is concerned. I think that this film does a lot of really good things, and you can look to the first half of our conversation to kind of really glean and understand it, but it does kind of lose itself in the end. And I'm curious to see what Peele's going to do next, and I am most curious to see about what DaCosta is going to do with the Marvels, because of this film is vastly different than Little Woods, and Candyman is vastly different than the family friendly film that we're going to get with the Marvels. So I think that she's showing a lot of range so early in her career that I'm really excited to see what she's gonna do.
Yeah, man. And, I hope this podcast is enough of a reason for people to go out there and give it a shot. Go out there and watch Candyman, and also go watch Little Woods, watch the debut feature of this director, because she's going to be a name that's going to be heard from for many years from now. I have a feeling, even though this film kind of performed below my expectations for me, I still have a good feeling about Nia DaCosta and her place in Hollywood.
All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for us on talking about Candyman 2021. If you guys have seen it, make sure that you guys let us know what you guys think on our social medias. But speaking of socials, Celeste, where can people find you and more about Feel and Film podcast?
Okay, you can find me on Twitter. You can find me on Instagram. On Twitter, I am a nerdy black male. On Instagram, I'm Black Nerd Magic, and Letterboxd, I'm Black Nerd Magic as well. You can find me on Facebook. My real name, Celeste, Caless, last name Davis. And also, if you want to check out Feeling Film, check us out on Facebook. We have a great discussion group, and we are welcome to anybody who wants to talk and discuss film without being judged and having a good time. And also check out our podcast, Feeling Film. We record on Sundays, and we also record throughout the week with new releases and films that we just love to watch.
All right. Well, you guys can. It's a great group. Seriously. You guys can find me. I'm at Letterboxd. I'm at Captain Nostalgia, and you guys can follow me on TikTok at Gents Ghostface, and you guys can follow us everywhere at Victims and Villains. If you go to victimsandvillains.net, not only can you guys find more podcasts like this, you guys and movie reviews from Celeste, myself, and whole sea of other talented writers. You guys can also find all of our social media, including Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube, along with links to support us via Patreon and PayPal as well. And you guys can also, most importantly, find mental health resource library as well. So if you guys have made it through this long, I want to dare to say his name 5 times. Could you do it? Could you stand in front of a mirror and say it 5 times?
As a kid, I didn't do it because my mama taught me better, and even still now, 30 years old, I'm still not gonna do it.
Our spoiler free review that I did for YouTube, I stood in front of a mirror and did it. So I don't know. I don't know. My week seems to be pretty weird so far. So we'll keep you guys updated. But you guys have a good night, and look out for this Saturday when we're going to be talking starting to roll out our coverage of Creature Feature Weekends. Have a good night, guys.